Hi everyone, my name is Blake Whitcomb and I'm the Sports Science Business Development Manager for IMeasureU. We wanted to show you a quick tutorial and webinar on how you can potentially monitor your athletes remotely using our lower limb workload monitoring solution, IMU STEP. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to show you how an athlete would set themselves up, upload data, and then the remote practitioner could look at their data set and provide objective feedback as well as information on their rehab and how they're doing in the protocols that you're prescribing. So first and foremost, in our collection, we put a sensor on each medial tibia. So our IMUs are collecting high fidelity data. The athlete will then select their name and do a double knock on the left sensor and then the right sensor to assign that specific data or specific sensor, excuse me. Once they're done, they hit start and the sensors are then configured. At that point, the athlete can then go train. They don't need the device with them. They could go many miles away from the device and it's not going to affect the data because it's directly recording on the sensors. But they can also add a feature called footnotes, which allows them to tag the specific activities they're doing. And you can use any specific terminology that you in your organization use or that you communicate with your athletes with. Once they're done with a specific footnote, they can just hit stop on the tag. And then when they're done with the session, they can stop their recording. Once they're done, they just plug in their sensors. We have a desktop application that allows them to upload and process that data set. Specifically, this desktop application allows you to do a lot of things around trimming and adding more footnotes and things of that nature. But when you're working with a remote athlete, we tend to just have them upload the data right away without manipulating it in any way because it's really easy for them to do. It's just one click and then that data is uploaded and processed. Once it's done processing, then it's launched to the dashboard. Our dashboard is cloud-based, and that allows practitioners to visualize that data at a different remote location. So next we'll go over our data sets here. And we're going to go over a quick one of a remote athlete that was recovering from a right foot surgically repaired fracture. And her practitioner was based several states over and was primarily giving her feedback on her training based on her IMU STEP data, along with her clinical assessments that she was going to see in her hometown. So what we're seeing here is one treadmill Alter-G session. It's just under 20 minutes here, and this is our total steps that the athlete took in that given training session. The first thing we want to look at is the athlete's total impact load. So total impact load is essentially their workload for the day from a lower limb perspective. What we can do is really focus on the basics of their lower limb loading when we're working with them remotely. There's a lot more detail that you can dive into in our dashboard, but the basics are really what we want to focus on because we're not physically watching that athlete with our own eyes. So really quickly, what we notice from this data set is our left limb's in blue and our right limb here is in orange. The left limb has quite obviously incurred more impact load over the training session than the right limb. This was probably expected by the practitioners because of the surgically repaired right foot, but it was interesting to see at what level there was a difference. And really right out of the gate, there was a separation in the loading pattern. This line graph here is going to show us impact load per minute. So what we can see here is there's a little bit of a fluctuation in her pattern, but because she's on a treadmill running at a relatively similar cadence across the board, it's a pretty kind of tabletop shape here. If she was doing more interval style work, there would be more peaks and valleys in that impact load per minute. As we would expect from a treadmill session, her steps per minute are, her total steps are similar on both limb. And the impact load here for left versus right is just about 5,000 Gs off. So when we want to investigate the specific asymmetries of a task that the athlete's doing, we can then look at our session asymmetry view. And in this view, we're going to see every intensity on the y-axis, and then our left limb here in blue, right limb here in orange. And we can look at the total dispersion of intensities across the session. When we hover over one and we lock it in place, we're going to get our exact counts over here on the right. What really stands out from this session is a drastic underloading of that repaired foot. And so this practitioner then used the brushing tool to look at first half of training versus second half. They wanted to see if it was fatigue related or if this was just the pattern that was throughout the entire session. So really quickly, they were able to discover that it was a pattern throughout that entire session. So in a couple of sessions throughout manipulating things like her cadence and her stride length, they were able to get a much more symmetrical profile and identify that quickly in the dashboard that was being looked at remotely. So we can see this session has a lot higher volume. We're now kind of doubling the volume of steps from that first session. And if we hover over these right here, we're getting a left versus right step count, and we can see her cadence is increased by about 12 steps per minute. But what that did to her asymmetry view was it started to create a more overlapping profile. We still see a little bit of kind of a dispersion across a wider range on that foot, which could be most likely explained by some simple detraining and some neuromuscular things that she needs to work on. But they were way happier now that they were able to create a more symmetrical linear gait profile. And the other thing we can do then is now look at the chronic training load for a specific athlete. And so what we can do then is look at our third graph and fourth graph here, our all session summary. So this graph is going to show us every training session that the athlete's completed and how many steps per session, and then what is the distribution of low, medium, and high intensity impacts. We can also filter, so if we're more interested in specific intensities with a rehabbing athlete, we can do that here. But this view is primarily going to give you a really good mapping of aligning your intensity of training and your volume in training. Sometimes you may prescribe a specific activity and it may be controlled in its volume and what you think is going to be the intensity, but really quickly this will allow you to identify when intensities have spiked or dropped unnecessarily or contrary to what you've designed for that athlete. And then lastly, you'll be able to track their asymmetry profile over time. So for a rehabbing athlete, we tend to see these colors be darker because the more to one side they are asymmetric, they're going to be darker in color. But as that athlete starts to transition and load more symmetric, I should say, there will be kind of more opaque color transition. So this can be used as a progressive tool over time, especially if you're doing repeat protocols where the tasks are very specific and it's maybe early stage return to running. And we know that there's going to be some issues around loading and asymmetry kind of early on. So this tool can be used kind of at a very high level to do specific day tasks and look at asymmetry profiles of different drills. But if we want to just kind of look at it in a general sense for a remote athlete, we can also switch to week blocks and see how they're trending week to week from that profile. And then the last thing you could potentially do with a remote athlete is looking at the different surface types that they're training on. So you may be concerned early on in rehab with the specific surface types that they're being exposed to, concrete versus tracks versus soft surfaces like a grass turf. So this is an example of a session where we looked at specifically plyo hops on field turf, traditional field turf, or a track that was directly next to it. So the first thing we can look at is specifically the impact load. So for the impact load for our plyo on the turf, 20 rep counts, we got 400 for our score. But as soon as we went to the track, we got up to 700. When we went back to the turf, we're back down to 400, and then back to the track up to 800. So for a remote athlete, you could quickly test specific tasks on different surface types. And potentially, if I was an athlete recovering from a bone stress injury or an ACL, let's say, for example, early on, I might want to restrict them from the track because we're seeing a lot lower loading profile in this turf session. And it seems to be pretty consistent for this collection across multiple reps. So just a couple options for people that are looking to monitor their athletes remotely. The software is built around a cloud-based dashboard so that you can access it anywhere that you have access to the internet. And this is just an option, especially during this time where we might not have face-to-face access with our athletes. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly on our website, and we'd be happy to kind of talk through your specific examples or just chat about general training load monitoring with our system as well. All right, thank you.